We have this story. I said we're going to talk about it. We got this from CNN. Scientists slam Joe Rogan's podcast episode with Jordan Peterson as absurd and dangerous. Absurd.
What are they talking about? It was the greatest podcast ever.
I was listening to some of it. I'm saving it because I'm going on a trip this weekend. So I was like, I want to be able to listen to the full 4 hours. But Jordan Peterson really does say absurd. You know, like kind of like absurd. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. This segment is not about CNN complaining about Joe Rogan's podcast. It's about Joe Rogan's basically the New York Times. I've talked about this before. Setting the news cycle. What is the story we should be talking about? The New York Times, above the fold, front page news story. Ukraine invasion. Russia goes. Are we talking about whatever it is the New York Times cares about? Not really. We're talking about what Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan want to talk about. Did I say Jordan Peterson before? Joe Rogan is effectively...
No, you said Joe Rogan.
I said Joe Rogan. He's become the New York Times. So when CNN is like, scientists are upset at Joe Rogan's podcast over his story, Joe has just gotten them to talk about climate change. And now here we are addressing the issue. Joe Rogan's been in the news cycle nonstop for months over the guests he's been having, and it's with increasing frequency. Check this out. First, you have CNN. Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson. We have The Verge. Spotify can't afford to lose Joe Rogan. Now it's not even about Neil Young anymore. It's just about him. We have this from The Independent. What is this one? Joe Rogan podcast guest claims pandemic is just a money grab and they're trying to kill us once again. And it's Jordan Peterson. So what I see here is, look, man, you know, we're effectively becoming the Joe Rogan Review podcast by going to talk about this. But to be honest, we were the CNN Review podcast before that. We criticize the media. We criticize the mainstream press and the media lies. And now that Joe is basically taking over, you know, dictation of the news cycle, it is becoming prominent. It is becoming common to discuss the ideas that he's talking about. In fact, so prominent, I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe the 13th biggest podcast in the U.S. is the Joe Rogan Experience Review.
Whoa.
Yeah. It's like some guys talking about what Joe Rogan talked about.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is he the number one?
Joe Rogan isn't on iTunes anymore.
Oh yeah, Spotify.
So of course he's number one on Spotify.
Right.
Never moving. But on iTunes, I think it's number 13 is the Joe Rogan Review podcast.
So this is so interesting to me, and watching the mainstream media try to slam podcasts as like this huge source of mis and disinformation is really intriguing to me, because it looks like they're starting to wake up to the fact that Joe Rogan is in fact calling the shots. Like you were saying, he is in fact controlling the narrative. He's making them talk about this one thing that he wants to talk about. And whether they realize it or not, they're very much responding to exactly what he's doing, which if he were a very clever person, I'm sure he could use exactly to his advantage. And you're right. I do think that should give us a lot of hope as far as the right is concerned. I think that this means that the media is kind of starting to pay attention to the right, starting to hopefully perhaps maybe cater to the right. Not that we really necessarily want them to, but it's definitely a factor, and things are definitely shifting. So perhaps the tide is turning.